The massive station hung in the void like a glittering jewel, its crystal spires reaching out into the darkness of space. Nexus Prime had been the heart of galactic politics for over 2,000 years, and today it would witness something that had never happened before in its long history. Jake Morrison adjusted his dark blue uniform as he walked down the gleaming corridor toward the main council chamber. His footsteps echoed against the smooth walls that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Behind him walked Lisa Parker, her tablet in hand, ready to translate any of the 47 different alien languages they might encounter today. Colonel Ryan Davis brought up the rear, his military posture making it clear he was not just a diplomat. The three humans had been coming to this place for 3 long years, asking the same question over and over again. They wanted Earth to join the Galactic Council as a full member, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. Every time, they had been told to wait, to prove themselves, to accept restrictions that no other species had ever been asked to accept. Today was supposed to be different. Today the Council would finally give them an answer. The chamber doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing a sight that still took Jake's breath away even after all these visits. The room was enormous, with seating areas that curved up and away, like the inside of a giant bowl. Each section was designed for a different type of alien body, from the floating gas-filled spheres where the ethereal collective floated, to the deep pools where the aquatic depths dwellers swam. In the center of it all sat the High Arbiter's platform where Velthar waited. The crystalline being stood nearly 10 feet tall, his body made of what looked like living diamond. Light moved through him in patterns that showed his emotions, though Jake had never learned to read them properly. As the humans took their assigned seats in the small section marked for visiting species, Jake could feel hundreds of eyes watching them. Some were actually eyes, while others were heat sensors, electromagnetic detectors, or organs that humans had no names for. The attention felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. High Arbiter Velthar raised one of his crystal arms, and the chamber fell silent. When he spoke, his voice came from speakers throughout the room, translated into every language present. We gather today to address the petition of the species known as humans for full membership in our council, Velthar announced. After careful consideration of their request, we have prepared our response. Jake leaned forward slightly. This was it. 3 years of meetings, presentations, and negotiations had led to this moment. The Council recognizes that humans have shown certain capabilities that may be useful to our organization, Velthar continued. However, your species displays concerning tendencies toward violence and territorial expansion. Your technology, while interesting, lacks the sophistication we typically require from full members. Lisa's hand tightened on her tablet. She had spent months preparing documents that proved human technology was not only sophisticated, but often superior to what many council species used. Those documents had apparently been ignored. Therefore, Velthar said, the Council offers humanity the following path to eventual membership. The terms appeared on screens throughout the chamber, translated into every language. Jake read them, with growing disbelief. First, humanity would need to disarm completely. Every military ship, every weapon, every defense system would need to be destroyed or handed over to Council oversight. Earth would be allowed to keep only a small police force for internal security. Second, humans would surrender all claims to territory beyond Earth's moon. The growing colonies on Mars, the mining stations in the asteroid belt, the research outposts in the outer system, all would become Council property. Third, humanity would accept probationary species status. This meant they could attend Council meetings but not vote on any decisions. They could trade with Council members but only under strict supervision. Most importantly, this status would continue indefinitely with no guarantee it would ever change. Fourth, humans who wanted to work in Council space would need to sign labor contracts that would bind them to specific employers for minimum terms of 10 years. They would have no right to leave their jobs or change employers during this time. Around the chamber, Jake could see alien representatives nodding their approval. The Zephyrian Trade Consortium members were practically glowing with excitement. They had been pushing for those labor contracts for months. The militant Kroger Empire delegates looked satisfied that humanity would be effectively neutered as a military threat. Jake stood up slowly. The chamber had expected him to ask for time to consider the offer, or to begin negotiating the terms. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone, including his own team. "No," he said simply. The single word seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Velthar's crystal form flickered with what might have been confusion. "I'm sorry," the High Arbiter said. "Could you clarify your response?" "I said no," Jake repeated, his voice carrying clearly throughout the chamber. "The United Earth Federation rejects these terms completely. We withdraw our petition for council membership." A buzz of surprised conversation started up around the chamber. This had never happened before. Species begged to join the council. They accepted whatever terms were offered, grateful for any chance to be part of galactic civilization. "Perhaps you misunderstand," Velthar said. "These terms are generous. Many species have accepted far more restrictive conditions." "Then many species have made a mistake," Jake replied. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many alien gazes as he could. "We came here as equals, hoping to join a community of equals. Instead, you're asking us to become slaves." The word slaves caused an uproar. Several alien delegates jumped to their feet, or their equivalent of feet, shouting protests. The Kroger Empire representative roared something that the translators refused to process. While the Zephyrian leader's tentacles writhed with indignation, Velthar raised both arms, calling for silence. "Humanity has clearly misunderstood the generous nature of our offer. Perhaps more time to consider." "We understand perfectly," Jake interrupted. "You see us as primitives who should be grateful for whatever scraps you throw our way. You want our people as cheap labor, our resources as tribute, and our military removed as a threat. What you don't seem to understand is that we don't need you." The chamber fell silent again. In over 2,000 years of galactic politics, no species had ever said those words to the council. Lisa stood up beside Jake, closing her tablet with a snap. Colonel Davis rose as well, his hand resting casually near his sidearm, not threatening but making a point. "The United Earth Federation withdraws from all council proceedings effective immediately," Jake announced. "We'll handle our own affairs from here on out. Good luck with yours." The three humans turned and walked toward the exit. Behind them, the chamber erupted into chaos as delegates shouted questions, demands, and threats. But the humans didn't stop, didn't look back, and didn't change their minds. As the doors closed behind them, Jake Morrison smiled for the first time in 3 years. They had come to Nexus Prime hoping to join something greater than themselves. Instead, they had discovered something even more valuable. They didn't need anyone's permission to be great. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you underestimated humanity. 3 months had passed since Jake Morrison and his team walked out of the council chambers, and the galaxy was beginning to feel the first cracks in what everyone had thought was an unshakable foundation. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of her cargo ship New Horizon as it drifted in the void between star systems. The message she had just received from Earth Command was short and clear, but it would change everything. She read it again to make sure she understood. All human vessels operating in Council space are ordered to cease operations immediately. Return to Earth jurisdiction within 30 days, no exceptions. Amy looked out at the stars and allowed herself a small smile. She had been hauling cargo between alien worlds for 8 years, watching Council species treat humans like useful but inferior servants. Now it was time to go home. She turned to her communications officer. "Send word to all human ships in this sector. Tell them the recall order is real. Time to pack up and leave." Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy as thousands of human ships, stations, and installations received the same message. What the Council had failed to realize during all their negotiations was just how deeply humans had become woven into the fabric of galactic civilization. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, Chief Administrator Blixoth was having the worst day of his very long life. The multi-armed Altarian had been running mining operations for over 40 years, but he had never seen anything like this. "What do you mean they're all leaving?" he demanded, his forearms waving frantically at his human operations manager. Tom Bradley, a stocky man with graying hair, shrugged as he packed his personal belongings into a metal box. "Orders from Earth. All human personnel are being recalled. We're shutting down the deep extraction platforms and heading home. But you can't just leave." Blixoth's voice rose to a screech. "These platforms produce 70% of our rare minerals. I don't know how to operate the equipment." Tom paused in his packing and looked at the alien administrator with something that might have been pity. "You've been the boss here for 15 years, Blix. In all that time, did you ever think to learn how the mining actually works?" The truth was painful but simple. Blixoth had been happy to take credit for the incredible efficiency of his operations, while leaving all the actual work to his human staff. The humans had developed new extraction techniques that increased output by 300%. They had designed safety systems that reduced accidents to almost zero. They had created maintenance protocols that kept ancient equipment running like new, and Blixoth had never bothered to understand any of it. As Tom walked away toward the transport shuttle, Blixoth stared at the control panels that would soon be his responsibility. The symbols and readouts might as well have been written in an alien language, which he realized with growing horror, they basically were. The same scene was repeating itself across dozens of worlds. The Vorten Republic's agricultural centers watched in panic as human farming specialists packed their equipment. These humans had introduced crop rotation techniques that doubled harvests and soil management systems that restored fertility to damaged land. Without them, entire planetary populations faced potential famine. Dr. Ben Taylor was finishing his last surgery at the Central Medical Complex on New Geneva Prime when his assistant brought him the recall orders. The human doctor looked down at his patient, a young selenite whose crystal-like body had been damaged in an industrial accident. "Will she be okay?" asked Dr. Zeftol, the hospital's chief of staff. The elderly alien's multiple eye stalks were focused intently on Ben's work. "She'll recover completely," Ben said, carefully sealing the last of the crystal fractures with a technique he had developed specifically for selenite physiology. "But this is the last surgery I'll be performing here." Dr. Zeftol's eye stalks drooped. "You cannot leave. You are the only doctor in 3 sectors who understands our biology well enough to perform major surgery." Ben stripped off his surgical gloves and looked at his alien colleague with genuine sadness. "I've been trying to teach your staff these techniques for 5 years. Every time I offered training sessions, I was told that selenite doctors didn't need to learn primitive human methods." The irony was bitter. Human medicine had become legendary throughout the galaxy, not because it was more advanced, but because human doctors actually cared about their patients, regardless of species. They had spent years studying alien biology, developing new treatments, and training local staff. Most alien hospitals now depended on human medical personnel for everything from routine surgeries to complex research. As Ben gathered his equipment, he thought about the dozens of critical patients who would need care in the coming weeks. The hospital had excellent alien doctors, but they had grown dependent on human expertise for the difficult cases. Now they would have to relearn skills they had dismissed as beneath them. Meanwhile, communication networks across 3 entire sectors began experiencing their first serious failures in decades. The quantum relay stations that enabled faster-than-light communication were incredibly complex systems that required constant maintenance and adjustment. Most of these stations had been built by various alien species, but over the years, humans had taken over their operation and maintenance. Engineer Sarah Kim was the last human technician on Relay Station Omega 7, a massive structure that handled communications for over 200 star systems. She had spent 6 years keeping the ancient equipment running, developing workarounds for design flaws and improving efficiency by 40%. Now she stood in the main control room, watching warning lights flash as she systematically shut down human-modified systems. The original alien-built equipment would still work, but at a fraction of its current capacity. Station Commander Thyserak watched with growing alarm as communication speeds dropped and signal quality degraded. "Surely you can leave some instructions," the insectoid alien pleaded. "Some way for us to maintain your improvements." Sarah looked at the thousands of modifications she had made over the years. Each one was documented, but the knowledge needed to understand and maintain them represented years of experience and intuition that couldn't be written down in a manual. "I tried to train your engineering staff," she said quietly. "Every month for 3 years I offered to teach them these systems. I was told that humans were only good for manual labor, not for understanding real engineering." As Sarah's shuttle departed the station, communication delays that hadn't been experienced in decades began rippling across the sector. Ships lost contact with their bases. Trade convoys couldn't coordinate their routes. Emergency services found themselves operating blind. Back on Nexus Prime, emergency council sessions had become a daily occurrence. High Arbiter Velthar found himself facing increasingly desperate reports from member species. The hegemony of Trill reported that their food production had dropped by 60%. The Kroger Empire was struggling to maintain order in their outer territories without human military advisors. The Ethereal Collective's research programs had ground to a halt when their human scientists departed. "This is temporary," Velthar announced to the assembled delegates. "These humans were useful, yes, but they were not irreplaceable. We managed perfectly well before they arrived." But even as he spoke, the High Arbiter could see doubt in the faces around him. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Over the past 50 years, human expertise had become so integrated into galactic civilization that removing it was like pulling out the foundation stones of a building. What made it worse was that most species had never realized how dependent they had become. They had been happy to let humans do the difficult, dangerous, or tedious work while taking credit for the results. Now faced with the prospect of doing that work themselves, they were discovering just how much they had forgotten, or never learned in the first place. As reports of system failures and economic disruption poured in from across the galaxy, one thing became clear. The Council had made a catastrophic miscalculation about who needed whom. 6 months after humanity's dramatic departure from the Galactic Council, the first alien delegation arrived at Earth's orbital defense station, requesting emergency assistance. Admiral Carol Evans watched their ship approach with a mixture of amusement and disgust. The vessel belonged to the hegemony of Trill, one of the species that had voted most strongly against human membership. Now they were coming to beg for help, though they would never use that word. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "the Trill delegation is requesting immediate humanitarian aid. They say their agricultural systems are failing and millions face starvation." Carol leaned back in her command chair. She had been expecting this call for weeks. The Trill homeworld had been one of the first to suffer serious consequences when human agricultural specialists withdrew. Their traditional farming methods hadn't been used in decades, and the younger generation had never learned them. "Tell them we'll consider their request," Carol said. "But first they need to speak with our Selective Cooperation Department." The Selective Cooperation Department was Earth's new organization for dealing with alien requests for assistance. Its creation had been Foreign Minister Dan Brooks's idea, and it was proving to be very effective at sorting genuine emergencies from species that simply wanted to return to the old arrangement where humans did all the work. Dan sat in his office reviewing the daily reports with growing satisfaction. His desk was covered with requests for help from across the galaxy. The Vorthan Republic offered exclusive mining rights to 3 star systems in exchange for agricultural advisors. The Selenite Collective promised to share their crystal-growing technology if human doctors would return to their hospitals. Most interesting of all were the messages from individual aliens who wanted to defect from their own governments and join human space. Apparently working alongside humans for years had shown many aliens just how much better human society treated both its own people and others. Dr. Zeftal from New Geneva Prime had been one of the first to request asylum. The elderly Selenite doctor had spent months trying to perform surgeries without human assistance and had watched several patients die from complications he couldn't handle alone. His request to Earth was simple. He wanted to emigrate and learn proper medical techniques from human doctors. But the most shocking news came from the outer territories of the Kroger Empire, where a full-scale rebellion was tearing apart what had once been the galaxy's most feared military power. General Kraxthor had ruled the Kroger Outer Rim with an iron fist for 20 years, but that was when he had human mercenary companies and military advisors to help maintain order. The humans had provided tactical expertise, advanced weapons maintenance, and, most importantly, intelligence networks that could spot trouble before it started. Now, facing the largest uprising in Kroger history, the general found himself commanding an army that couldn't communicate properly, couldn't maintain its equipment, and couldn't gather reliable information about enemy movements. How many human military contractors did we have? Kraxthor demanded of his aide, a nervous young Kroger whose scales were turning pale with stress. Approximately 12,000 across all Outer Rim territories, sir, the aide replied. They handled logistics, communications, weapons maintenance, and tactical planning for most operations. Kraxthor felt something he had never experienced before. Genuine fear. His army was falling apart and he didn't know how to stop it. Worse yet, the rebels seemed to be using tactics that looked suspiciously familiar, tactics that his former, human advisors had taught him years ago. The truth was even more embarrassing than he realized. Several of the rebel leaders were aliens who had worked closely with human military personnel and had learned not just tactics, but also concepts like treating civilians with respect and giving soldiers reasons to fight beyond fear. These ideas were spreading through the outer territories like wildfire. Back on Earth, President Maria Santos convened the new Galactic Relations Committee in the secure conference room beneath the Capitol. The committee included all the key figures from humanity's withdrawal: Jake Morrison, now serving as Director of Alien Affairs, Admiral Carol Evans, Dr. Ben Taylor, who had returned to head Earth's Medical Corps, and several others. The situation, reports are coming in faster than we can process them, Jake reported. 17 different species have officially requested emergency assistance. 3 more are offering us territorial concessions if we'll return their human workers. And we're getting over 1,000 individual asylum requests per day. President Santos studied the holographic display showing the current state of galactic civilization. Red zones marked areas experiencing severe difficulties, yellow showed moderate problems, and green indicated stable regions. The display was mostly red and yellow, with only a few small green areas, mostly species that had maintained good relationships with humans or had never become dependent on human expertise. "What's the situation with the council itself?" she asked. "Complete chaos," Jake replied with obvious satisfaction. "High Arbiter Velthar has called 7 emergency sessions in the past month. Half the member species are demanding that the council find a way to bring humans back. The other half are insisting that accepting human terms would destroy the council's authority." Admiral Evans leaned forward. "We're also seeing some interesting military developments. The Kroger Empire is requesting mercenary support. They're willing to pay triple the old rates. Several smaller species are asking for protection services because they can't maintain their own defense forces." Dr. Taylor added his own observations. "The medical requests are the most urgent. We're seeing species facing genuine health crises because they never maintained their own medical expertise. Some of these situations could become humanitarian disasters." President Santos considered the options carefully. Earth was in an unprecedented position of power, but with that power came difficult choices. They could help species that were facing genuine emergencies, but they couldn't simply return to the old system where humans did all the work while aliens took all the credit. "What about the species that treated our people well?" she asked. "The ones that actually worked with us as partners instead of just using us as cheap labor?" Jake smiled. "That's where it gets interesting. About 15 species maintained, genuinely, cooperative relationships with human workers. They're not experiencing the same level of crisis because they actually learned from us instead of just depending on us. And they're all asking to establish formal partnerships outside the council framework," Admiral Evans added. "They want to work with us directly, without council oversight." The implications were enormous. For the first time in galactic history, a significant number of species were considering leaving the council to join a human-led organization. It was exactly the opposite of what the Council had expected when they offered humanity those humiliating terms 6 months ago. President Santos made her decision. We help species facing genuine humanitarian crises, but only on our terms. Medical aid goes to anyone who needs it. We don't let people die to make a political point. But everything else gets evaluated case by case. She stood up and looked around the room at the people who had helped humanity navigate this crisis. The Council thought they were offering us a choice between submission and isolation. They never considered that we might choose a third option: leadership. As reports continued to pour in from across the galaxy, it became clear that the old order was collapsing. The question now wasn't whether the Galactic Council would survive, but what would replace it, and humanity was about to provide the answer. 1 year after walking out of the Galactic Council chambers, Jake Morrison found himself returning to Nexus Prime under very different circumstances. This time, he wasn't arriving as a supplicant, hoping for membership in someone else's organization. He came as the lead representative of the newly formed Terran Commonwealth, and he brought terms of his own. The Earth Federation battleship Independence dominated the space around Nexus Prime, its sleek hull bristling with weapons that made the station's aging defense systems look like toys. Behind it, a small fleet of human vessels waited in formation, not threatening but making their presence unmistakably clear. Inside the council chambers, the atmosphere was completely different from Jake's last visit. Gone was the arrogant confidence of species dictating terms to primitives. In its place was barely concealed desperation, as alien delegates whispered among themselves and cast nervous glances at the human delegation. High Arbiter Velthar's crystalline form seemed dimmer than before, the light patterns moving through, his body sluggish and uncertain. The past year had not been kind to the Galactic Council's leadership. Ambassador Morrison, Velthar began, his translated voice carrying none of its former authority. We are pleased that humanity has reconsidered its hasty departure from civilized society. Jake remained standing, a subtle breach of protocol that sent ripples of unease through the chamber. We haven't reconsidered anything, he replied calmly. We're here to present the Terra Accords, the terms under which humanity might resume cooperation with galactic civilization. The phrase Terra Accords had been carefully chosen, not Earth's surrender terms or humanity's request for readmission, but accords, agreements between equals. The distinction was not lost on anyone present. Jake activated a holographic display that showed the terms in every major galactic language. The silence in the chamber was absolute as delegates read what humanity was proposing. The Terra Accords were revolutionary in their simplicity. Humanity would not rejoin the Galactic Council. Instead, they would establish the Terran Commonwealth, a new organization based on principles of mutual respect and genuine cooperation. Any species could choose to work with the Commonwealth or remain with the Council, but not both. Trade agreements would be bilateral and fair, with no species granted special privileges based on political connections. Military cooperation would be mutual, with humans providing protection only to those who proved they deserved it. Most importantly, any species wanting to join the Commonwealth would need to demonstrate that they treated their own people and other species with dignity and respect. This is preposterous, sputtered the Zephyrian trade representative, his tentacles writhing with indignation. You cannot simply create a parallel organization to challenge the Council's authority. We're not challenging anything, Jake replied smoothly. We're offering an alternative. Species can choose which organization they prefer to work with. The Kroger Empire delegate, General Kraxthor himself, leaned forward aggressively. And if we refuse to recognize this so-called Commonwealth? Jake's smile was cold. Then you don't. But you also don't get access to human trade, human technology, or human assistance when your outer territories continue their rebellion. The words hit like a physical blow. Kraxthor's rebellion had spread to over half the Kroger Empire's territory, and his forces were barely holding the core worlds. Without human military advisors and equipment, his once mighty empire was crumbling from within. Across the chamber, other delegates were reading the terms with growing alarm. The Commonwealth offered everything the Council provided, trade networks, mutual defense, scientific cooperation, but without the corruption, favoritism, and exploitation that had become standard council practice. Dr. Zeftol, now serving as the Selenite Collective's representative after successfully requesting asylum and returning as an Earth citizen, stood to address his former council colleagues. His multiple eye stalks focused on each delegate in turn. "I have spent the past 6 months working in human hospitals," he said, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "I have seen how they treat their patients, their colleagues, and their subordinates. The respect, the equality, the genuine desire to help others. These are not political positions for humans. They are fundamental values." His words carried special weight because everyone knew his story. The respected Selenite doctor had watched patients die because he lacked the skills that human medical personnel could have provided. His defection to human space had been one of the most publicized examples of the Council's failure. "The Commonwealth offers what the Council has forgotten how to provide," Dr. Zeftol continued. "True partnership between equals." As the implications of the Terra Accord sank in, delegates began to realize they were facing an impossible choice: stay with the failing Council and continue struggling without human expertise, or join the Commonwealth and admit that their 1,000-year-old organization had been surpassed by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The Altarian Mining Consortium was the first to break. Chief Administrator Blixoth, whose mining operations had collapsed without human expertise, stood with obvious reluctance. "The Altarian Republic requests information about Commonwealth membership requirements," he announced, his multiple arms trembling with the effort of swallowing his pride. A murmur ran through the chamber. If the Altarians, one of the Council's founding members, were considering defection, then the entire structure of galactic politics was about to change. More voices joined in. The Vorthan Republic, facing agricultural collapse, requested emergency talks about Commonwealth partnership. 3 smaller species announced they were formally withdrawing from the Council to apply for Commonwealth membership immediately. High Arbiter Velthar watched his carefully constructed authority crumble in real time. "This is madness," he declared, his crystalline form flashing with angry light patterns. "The Council has maintained galactic peace for over 2,000 years. You cannot simply tear down civilization because you are unhappy with its structure." Jake finally took his seat, but not in the small visitor section where humans had been relegated before. He sat in the center of the chamber, in the space traditionally reserved for Council leadership. "We're not tearing down civilization," he said quietly. "We're building a better one." Captain Amy Rodriguez, now serving as the Commonwealth's Director of Trade Relations, activated another display showing trade and cooperation statistics. The numbers were staggering. In just 6 months, the informal human trade network had become more profitable and efficient than Council commerce that had taken centuries to develop. 23 species have already applied for Commonwealth partnership, she reported. Another 15 are in preliminary discussions. Trade volume through Commonwealth networks has increased by 400% compared to Council levels. The success wasn't just economic. Admiral Carol Evans presented security reports showing that Commonwealth partners experienced significantly lower levels of conflict, piracy, and internal unrest. When species were treated as genuine equals and given real stakes in their own defense, they fought harder to protect what they had built. Dr. Ben Taylor's medical reports were equally impressive. Commonwealth health initiatives had eliminated 3 major diseases and reduced infant mortality by 60% across member species. When human medical expertise was combined with alien biological knowledge in genuine partnership, the results exceeded what either could achieve alone. As the presentations concluded, the choice facing the galaxy became crystal clear. The Council offered the comfort of familiar dysfunction, corruption, exploitation, and slowly declining standards of living for most species. The Commonwealth offered something unprecedented: genuine equality, mutual respect, and the chance to build something better. Over the following months, the decision played out exactly as President Maria Santos had predicted. Species faced with the choice between a failing system and a successful alternative chose success. The Council didn't collapse overnight. but it became increasingly irrelevant as its members defected to join humanity's new organization. High Arbiter Velthar found himself presiding over an empty chamber, the crystalline spires of Nexus Prime, echoing with the footsteps of his departed colleagues. The species that remained were either too proud to admit their mistake or too invested in the old system's corruption to embrace genuine reform. Jake Morrison stood in the same spot where he had once been offered impossible terms and delivered humanity's rejection. Now he looked out at representatives of 43 species who had chosen partnership over domination, cooperation over exploitation. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth that would reshape interstellar relations for generations to come. Humanity's greatest strength had never been their weapons, their technology, or even their competence. It was their refusal to accept that some people deserved to be treated better than others, and that principle, more than any military victory or economic triumph, had made them the leaders of a new galactic civilization.